Don't mind my voice, I've had this for 2 weeks, it's not contagious.
We're gonna
I'm gonna have to cancel.
You're becoming a Muppet.
Actually, today's day 15.
Maddie, are we ready? And are we recording?
This is the best
All
I've
right.
seen.
I'll call the meeting to order, and will the clerk please call the roll?
Councilmember Hagenow.
Present.
Councilmember Kerr.
Present.
Councilmember Parmet.
Hello.
Councilmember Sullivan.
Here.
Councilmember Thisted.
Present.
Mayor Riley.
Present.
There are 6 members present.
All right, thank you. Now's the time for public comment period, and the public is invited to make any comments that they would like on any item on the work session agenda. And we're open for comments. Is there anyone in person who would like to make a comment? Is there anyone online who would like to make a comment? Do you see any, Maddie?
No.
In that case, I'm closing the public comment period, and now I'll introduce Larry McGarry from Excel, and I'll turn it over to Larry.
Okay, let me see if I can get the mic right. I don't feel like I need to be amplified very often, but here we are.
That needs it.
Hey, I'm Blair McGarry. Thank you guys so much for having me. I am the Community and Governmental Affairs Area Manager. I represent Summit, Eagle, Lake, Park, and Grand counties for Excel Energy. Thank you for having me. I'm here this afternoon, this lovely afternoon, to talk to you about both the Mountain Energy Project as well as our wildfire mitigation plan. These are both 2 plans that have been filed with the Public Utility Commission of Colorado, the PUC. You will hear me refer to them often. All right, what are we up to? Excel has been leading the clean energy transition for quite some time. We're the first U.S. energy provider with the goal of delivering 100% carbon-free electricity by 2050. We're the first to add goals for net zero natural gas use in buildings and zero carbon transportation. We've been inducted into the Climate Leadership Hall of Fame in 2022. And our projected electricity and natural gas emissions and reductions goals validated by climate modeling experts. We're just not making these numbers up. Yeah, we're really committed to this. Very, very committed to these goals, and while balancing, our #1 goal, which is to deliver safe, reliable, affordable, and clean energy. Again, net zero energy provider by 2050. We're very on target to meet that. We anticipate being at about 80% reduction of carbon emissions by 2030. We actually think we'll be closer to about 85% by 2030. We know that it's going to be that last 10%. That last 5 to 10% is going to be the hard push, right? All right. We're going to talk about the Mountain Energy Project. Again, this was filed with the PUC back in January. We specifically tonight are going to be talking about the Eastern Mountain System. Our overall mountain gas system, we serve over 65,000 customers and 3 utilities. Those are the local distribution companies you might have your gas through Tiger Gas. 975 miles of transmission pipeline and 8 compressor stations. As you can see, it's a little bit off of mine. That Marshall compressor station feeds up here into the mountains, and Breckenridge and Keystone are kind of the end of the line. All right, planning for the energy future. Why are we talking about this? Sorry, it's hard for me to stay in one place over here. We are severely gas capacity constrained here in the mountains. I just showed you that map. We're at the end of the line, right? So what does that mean? What does that mean for your constituents? What does it mean for our users? Back in February of 2019, you saw the effects of what happens when we see a drop in pressure in our natural gas system. So there was an article in the paper, February 9th of 2019, And what had happened is we had implemented rolling outages across Summit County. Because we saw a drop in pressure in that natural gas system, and our number one concern is we do not want to lose users off of that gas system. We do not want to have to go back in and relight those pilot lights. We're trying to keep users on that system. So we implement electric outages, right? So I was living on Ptarmigan at the time. We had a 30-minute outage, and then they moved it over to Frisco. Wasn't working for itself. And then they moved it over to Breckenridge, and so on and so forth. Why do we do that? Why does it affect your electric system? When we pull people off of the electric system, that inherently pulls their furnace, their boiler, whatever it might be, off of that gas system. It doesn't kill their pilot light. So we needed to solve for that problem. We knew we needed to solve for that problem, right? So for the last 3 heating seasons, we've had modular LNG, modular liquid natural gas, at the corner, 2 heating seasons, it was at the corner of Coin Valley Road and Highway 9 over on Breckenridge. And there's some tanks sitting at the old DNR kennel site today. Those tanks, again, they're rolled in on trucks that go over Loveland Pass. The trucks drop them off, the trucks drive away, and they leave the tanks. We have a vaporizer and an odorizer on site. And we vaporize that liquid natural gas, we odorize it, and then we compress it down into the system to create resiliency and reliability on those really cold days. Otherwise, we'd see those rolling outages. So that's how we've been solving for this gas capacity constraint for the last 3 heating seasons. We need a long-term solution to that, and we've been researching this Mountain Energy project for about the last, I think, 3 to 5 years is what I've heard. And I like to describe the Mountain Energy project as a 3-legged stool. We've just talked about the modular LNG. Part of this $155 million project, again, designed specifically for Summit County, there are 3 legs of the stool. Beneficial electrification, so upgrading our electric system to be sure that as we're moving people off of the natural gas system, that our electric system can handle that load. Implementation of NPAs. We are really excited about this. About $47 million earmarked to come directly into Summit County in what we call NPAs, non-pipeline alternatives. So a non-pipeline alternative is anything that will delay, prevent a new gas pipeline from coming into town. We did the modeling for bringing a new pipeline into town. The cost of that would be about $300 million. So again, we're trying to keep the rates down for our users. Affordability is key, right? But how do we do that and maintain reliability? Okay, so 3 legs of the stool. Let me see where I am in my slides. Okay, so the 3rd leg of that stool is the modular LNG that we talked about, in addition to compressed natural gas over here on the Keystone side of things. So we've had compressed natural gas sitting kind of along Highway 9 for a couple of heating seasons now. We don't have tanks there, which is the nice thing about the compressed natural gas today. If we see that we need some compressed natural gas, we'll drive a tank up, they hook into the system, and create reliability in the system. We anticipate needing 1 to 2 tanks in the coming years to support the growth that we're seeing in Keystone and maintain the reliability that we're used to. Yes?
1 to 2 tanks on a daily basis?
No, for the heating season. So 1 tank on site, we do anticipate that probably growing to 2 tanks in the next 10 years. But 1 is next heating season, potentially.
And would that be predominantly used for the times when we have the cold weather, the below 0 type weather?
Yes, sir.
And other than that, it would probably be just the normal flow?
Yes, sir. But the tank would still be sitting there. Yes, sir. Yep. So non-pipeline alternatives, that's a term that we throw around a lot. I want to make sure that we give that some time because again, it's incentivizing, right? People to convert away from their boiler, their furnace, to potentially heat pump. It's incentivizing people during high demand use times, to maybe shift their uses. It's everything from weatherization of your home, insulation, windows, and incentivizing it up to 100%. We did extensive surveying among the residents here in Summit County, and we found that even when we incentivized at 80%, we were not going to see the reduction in use on our natural gas system that we needed to see to make this work. So we proposed to the PUC that we incentivize any of those conversions at 100%. I don't want to move too fast here.
Question, $45 million, I think you said would be in that NPA bucket for incentives. When you look at the population that we have, Keystone alone has about 3,700 residents, and we're not large. We have 30,000 residents in Summit County. When you do the math, that's about $1,500 a resident.
We do not anticipate everyone converting. And we're really targeting, we want to pull the big users off of the system. And so we're targeting both residential and commercial. And again, this is for a 10-year proposal. We do, if I brought the engineers up here, they'd be able to show you this a little bit better, but we do anticipate it taking some time for the implementation of NPAs to kind of catch on and really start to make that shift away. Now, let me be clear. Even implementing the NPAs, we still are seeing growth on the system. We brought on 15,000 new users to our natural gas system across the state in 2023. It might have been 2024. The system is continuing to grow at this time, right? By bringing on these NPAs, it's not saying we're going to be able to reduce the number of tanks. It's saying that we are modeling for, again, 1 to 2 with the implementation of NPAs into Keystone, and with and modeling, I think, 5 to 8 tanks on the liquid natural gas side for Breckenridge. So again, it's not getting people fully away from gas. We do believe in customer choice and allowing people to make what decision is best for them.
How do you get the big users? And the biggest users I can think of are the guys who have heated driveways, have heated walkways like in River Run, as Kindred is going in. How do you get, and I think those systems, one, very expensive, they've already paid to have the pipeline expanded in Keystone. How do you get them to convert?
You incentivize them at 100%, and you make sure that you're providing the water source heat pumps. Because if you're exactly right, it is those users that we want off of the system, and you're not going to see them convert if there are not ways to support that radiant floor heat, if there's not ways to support the heat melt system on the driveway. And so we are ensuring that the right products are being put onto the market and available for the rebates and incentives. That's another huge area of conversation, right? We feel like a barrier is the customer having to pay the vendor and then the reimbursement on taxes. We would much rather pay that vendor directly. And those are the kind of things that we're working out right now with the PUC. As you know, everything that we do is highly regulated by those guys.
So your proposal would pay 100% of the cost for KNC and Kindred and Vail Resorts, who's going to be putting a heated sidewalk system in that whole complex as well, of the cost to convert?
Potentially.
Go ahead.
This is what I have on Mountain Energy Project.
So if there's 15,000 new users and it seems like there's a significant demand for natural gas, why is the focus to move away from natural gas as a company instead of expanding the operations that are currently there?
We are being mandated by the state to move away from non-renewable resources. And that's really the push. We are a natural gas company, which is why we do believe in customer choice.
Question. The resistance to even 100%, is that around the cost per kilowatt hour, or what do you imagine would stop adoption?
We believe that the resistance to that is not everyone wants to convert away from their gas.
Why?
Gas is reliable.
And a lot cheaper.
It's a lot cheaper.
We agree. Again, we're very mandated by the state, you know, and that is where we are being pushed. As you know, we're closing down 2 coal plants right now. I can digress on that too. I'll let you go ahead.
No, so you said you had 4 goals, and one of them was cost effective, you know, because you know, our constituents across the county is, the cost of a house to live there is expensive. And what I'm hearing here is that this is gonna go up more than if we just had gas.
Yes.
That's what I'm hearing.
Yes, that is correct. And again, safe, reliable, affordable, and clean. It's that order for us. It is arguable at many levels, and it is being said out loud at the state level, that perhaps legislators are putting clean above affordability. And we do have lobbyists down there that are aggressively working to make sure that we maintain affordability. But we are, again, very regulated by the state and by the Public Utility Commission, who is appointed by the governor.
Okay, because I heard $155 million program, it costs $200 million for the pipe that could be in there forever, that could be
300.
amortized.
300.
Oh, gotcha. But it can be amortized over a ton of years. So that would be probably the most cost effective would be a new pipe. Then you wouldn't have to go through all those programs.
That is, what I will say is that we do not feel like we would be able to get approval from the PUC for additional investments in gas infrastructure like a pipeline.
Okay, that's fair.
And I think that's one of the reasons that some county governments have probably, at least talking about, is this the right solution, or seeking to become, have the right to speak before the PUC.
We welcome the public engagement, and we're very glad that Summit County and the municipalities within have intervened and are a participant in that. Yeah, we believe that affordability is definitely, clean is in competition for affordability right now.
My concern goes back to the housing cost for our residents. I mean, our full-time residents here are really stretched today. This will stretch them further. Full-time residents are probably not the ones who are going to be able to afford to participate heavily into the investments that you're talking about. And so for them, I just see major problems with the path you're on.
Thank you for that feedback. We feel like we've heard from Summit County government that they do not want to see an additional pipeline coming into town due to some of the sustainability concerns around that.
You know, I understand there's probably some disagreements between communities in Summit.
Okay. And that's tough with, you know, you guys intervening as a coalition, right? Getting those messages.
But as a whole, but we are fairly united in the view that perhaps the path you propose isn't the best path from an implementation standpoint. For instance, I can't see KNC and Kindred after they've just, within the last couple of years for KNC, and Kindred just going online now, they paid a huge amount of dollars to Excel to expand the gas pipeline capability in Keystone to serve them. And Vail Resorts, the same thing for that area between the end of where Kindred ends and the gondola going away. I just can't see them putting additional capital dollars in. And then looking at having to go back to their, particularly KNC, their constituents, and say, hey, we're going to have to raise your dues because we're now doing this with electric and we're clean, but your dues are going to go up.
Yes, we hear you, and again, we don't anticipate those users that just made these large investments to be the first ones to make that transition. But we do know that, you know, within Summit County, there are residents and some commercial users that are very interested in being electric for various reasons.
I question the amount of dollars that you have in that Senate program. At 45 million, the number of residents we have in Summit, and a large number of those are on natural gas for heat. For a private homeowner to go in and say, all right, I'm going to change it all out. And oh, by the way, I have radiant heat, which makes it even more problematic to change out.
The water-based.
Yeah.
Absolutely, no. We do understand these challenges, and we do not anticipate everyone coming on board. And I think that's what the modeling is showing with the addition of tanks, the growth in tanks, not the reduction of them.
Why couldn't you just stay with the temporary solutions? I know Breckenridge doesn't like that, but
We are running into some challenges. The federal government does not allow for that temporary to be in place for more than 3 years.
I'm talking about your proposal here for compressed natural gas for Keystone and for the liquefied permanent facility in Breck. Why not just expand those to provide the capacity for the end of the tail?
That's exactly what we're trying to do as the modular within the plan. So that's exactly what we're trying to do, is create reliability in the system by expanding those facilities to a more permanent facility.
But as I read your plan and submission to the PUC, what I read was you anticipated the use of that for about 10 years.
It is a 10-year plan. I will say to you that I do not anticipate those tanks going away in 10 years.
That's the problem. Your plan is 10 years, and you're gonna put the permanent solution in, and then what, we come back and go through this again.
And yes, is the answer to that. And again, it is very much because we're regulated by the PUC. We just got approval from the PUC last May to even plan for our distribution system, because the industry is in a different place. Yep.
All right.
One thing I had a question on, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
You mentioned the federal government and them having a play in this. The plan being released in January, there's obviously been an administrative change and a different approach, I think, to a lot of views on renewable resources. Has that been taken into account? Have you re-looked at the plan and what likely will be coming from that federal side?
Yes. The federal regulations that we are up against is that we have had this temporary site in place for 3 years. The federal government says that after 3 years, this isn't temporary anymore. You're permanent, right? And so you need to put those more permanent mitigation efforts in place. Those mitigation efforts depend on the size of the property and the location of that property, what the proximity is to other neighbors, things like that. So that's what we're working through, and it has been a challenge.
Thank you.
I just wanted to call attention to the rock and hard place situation that this is for Excel and community. And I appreciate the study that you did that, well, we're going to offer incentives. Let's offer ones that actually work, and we actually need to do 100% to get any response, and even that's not going to do it. Well, that's another piece of your rock and hard place. And I just want to make a general comment that feel like we're a little bit like Norway. We like to say we're a green state, and we're very happy to pump gas out of the ground and sell it, but don't use it, my goodness. I find gas to be very reliable, but I see that the policies seem to be very opposed in what we're willing to approve at one part of the state and what the PUC appears to be willing to approve. So that's just my general commentary on it.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
Any other comments? All right.
All right, wildfire mitigation. Make more fun, guys. All right, wildfire mitigation.
I forgot a question.
Yes, sir.
Where are you looking at compressed natural gas locations to be in the Keystone area?
Along Highway 9, the same location that we've had it in the last 3 years.
Highway 9 doesn't go.
I'm sorry, 6, excuse me. Along the Hartman property.
All right.
It's where it's been for the last 3 years. But we're not exactly sure where it'll land. All right. Wildfire mitigation. This is another plan that we filed with the PUC, I believe, back in August of 2024. It has been going through the public comment period. I think we all lived through some of the challenges of the implementation of the wildfire mitigation plan. But this is the stuff that you know, right? Extreme weather and drier conditions are a near year-round threat here in Colorado, really across the nation. And utilities across the country have been working to mitigate that risk, particularly around our assets. Xcel is very committed to doing our part, but to be very clear, our goal is to ensure that no catastrophic wildfire is started by Xcel Energy assets, and our wildfire mitigation efforts are intended to support that goal. All right, here's the slide. Delivering safe, reliable, affordable, and clean energy to Coloradans, right? We serve 1.6 million electric customers, 1.5 million natural gas customers. We have just over 24,000 miles of transmission lines and over 80,000 miles of distribution lines. I'd like to take a minute right now, just because I'm a community relations person, not an engineer. Transmission lines, I like to think of as like I-25, I-70, if you will. And then you've got your feeder lines that kind of act as your state highways, and then your distribution lines that are bringing that energy and that power into your home. Yeah, again, safe, reliable, affordable, and clean. I will say it again. Affordable and clean are in a little bit of competition right now. Okay, why do outages occur? Severe weather, vegetation and trees, vehicle accidents. We had an outage in Silverthorne over Thanksgiving where a car slid into a transformer and then put it in reverse and backed out. It took us a while to find those. There wasn't a car sitting on the transformer. It took us a while to find that. Equipment related or upgrades and failures. Wildlife and other objects. We find birds sitting on our lines more often than not. Underground and hit lines. Outage classifications. Momentary outage is less than 5 minutes. A sustained outage is greater than 5 minutes. A planned outage, outages that either a customer, towns ask us sometimes for outages for various reasons, or we take outages for various reasons, the company. And then a major event is exactly what it sounds like. All right, we're really committed to this work. Since 2020, we've invested over $500 million in wildfire mitigation activities. What you're seeing on the screen, the pole replacements, that's just work that we've done in 2023. We don't have those numbers yet for 2024. But we've been on a really aggressive pole replacement campaign. There's poles out there that have been sitting there since the 40s and 50s that we're aggressively trying to replace. Yeah, lots of upgrades to the system.
You obviously serve a very large network. Where are most of these efforts being seen in? Are they more industrial or, more populated areas? Are they more in between the areas where the transmission lines are? Where can that concentration be seen?
I would say they are across the state. We've got Summit County's infrastructure on our utility grid is a little bit better than other areas of the state. Aggressive pole replacement projects in Chafee, aggressive pole replacement projects in Fairplay, that area. In Summit County, we're more focused on hardening of the system, if you will. So, and we'll get into this on enhanced power safety settings, but when we're operating our lines in enhanced power safety settings, we're essentially running less energy through the lines to try to make it so that there's not as much energy to ignite something, right? Hardening of the system is upgrading some of these systems so that they're not, some of the equipment, so they're not as sensitive when they're operating in this enhanced power safety setting, if you will. And so that's more of the work that you're seeing happen in Summit County.
If electrification happens to reduce natural gas, will those, I forget the fancy term you just used, will we still be able to operate those transmission lines at a lower threshold? Or would it put it into a higher threshold and higher fire risk?
The fire risk, it's not dependent on natural gas necessarily. So let me make sure I answer this right. If we put more electricity on the system, it's not necessarily that there's more energy running through those lines. So we generate power, right? And then we run it through the transmission. We increase that energy and then pushes the electricity through the transmission lines. And as it goes through those transmission lines, it loses energy so it safely goes into your home, if you will. That system will all still be in place. It's not like there will be a ton more energy added to those lines necessarily. It's growing that substation technology to send the energy out differently. And I'm not an engineer, so getting me a little bit on this, but I can get the engineers to explain this to you if you'd like.
But my point was just, if the focus of the mountain project is to electrify a lot of homes, and we're talking right now about wildfire mitigation, and one of the strategies being reducing the electrification of those systems to prevent, that's what I heard was, to prevent potential wildfires. It seems like that's a conflict there.
So let me try to explain it a different way. This is not a perfect analogy by any means. You have a 200 amp house, right? And that 200 amp house gives you plenty of energy to do everything that you want to do. Run your dishwasher, do loads of laundry, keep all your lights on, watch TV, whatever you need to do. If you were to drop that down to say 100 amps, you're going to start tripping breakers. That's essentially what we're doing to our system, if you will. What we were doing to harden the system, and again, it's not a perfect analogy, but what we're doing to harden the system, if you will, is kind of upgrading the substation equipment to make it not as sensitive to those trips, if you will. Again, not a perfect analogy, but I don't think my first one was working.
Okay.
So increased electrification doesn't mean necessarily more distribution lines. You're just using the existing lines that you have and upping the amperage and pumping more stuff through it.
Yes.
And then a second question, it's awesome to see the investment in the infrastructure. The $500 million, is that being paid for by the communities that are mostly getting the replacement poles, or is that being paid for by the entire system?
Great question. And same thing with the Mountain Energy Project. Everything that we do is socialized across the state. So the $500 million is socialized across the state. The $155 million will be socialized across the state. But again, let me be clear and very transparent. That was the headline when we filed this plan with the PUC, was $9 per month per user, right, on your bill. And I will be very transparent with you. We are like taxes. We're going to get rate recovery on almost everything we do. If we're paying $3 for natural gas, you're paying $3 for natural gas. Same thing with electricity generation. Where we make money, the investments, is really off of the infrastructure that goes into the ground.
Thank you.
All right, enhanced power, should we move to the slide? Enhanced power safety settings. We talked about it a little bit, but that's what we're doing. And when we're operating in these enhanced power safety settings, we're seeing longer outages than you're used to seeing, right? So normally, when we're not in enhanced power safety settings, a squirrel hits the line and we have automatic reclosures on that line. So it hits the line, the squirrel drops to the ground, hopefully, that reclosure closes back up and you have that momentary little flicker of lights, okay? When we are operating in enhanced power safety settings, we have those automatic reclosures turned off, and we are required to send crews out to inspect and patrol that line to ensure that there is not anything sitting on it that could reignite. That is the main reason why we're seeing extended outages with enhanced power safety settings. We're improving every day, but we're learning. And as long as we're balancing risk with reliability, we are going to continue to operate our system with a very low risk tolerance. Okay, enhanced power safety settings, comparing it to public safety power shutoff. Public safety power shutoff is when we proactively turn the power off to prevent potential ignition of a wildfire. We have only, in PSCO's time, we have only implemented a public safety power shutoff one time. It was in April of 2024, and we proactively cut off power to 55,000 users down in the Boulder area. An additional 100,000 users did lose power, and we stand by that decision. We believe that we did prevent the ignition of a wildfire through that outage. It's not something we take lightly. We are not in the business of turning people's power off. Again, this is just one tool in our toolbox, but it is a very effective tool. I think I just, again, want to be very transparent and very clear with you. I think down in Texas and New Mexico, another area that we serve, in the last 3 weeks, we had, I think, 3 public safety power shutoffs, and we turned off power to about 125,000 customers proactively. The positive that I'll give you is that it happened down there, and we're learning a lot down there through communications, what we need to do to make sure that our most vulnerable populations, are not drastically affected. But it is a very real tool in our toolbox that we are anticipating implementing.
Carol?
I don't recall when you used the public safety power shutoff, a lot of controversy about the idea. What I recall is a lot of outcry about the communications or lack thereof. So when you say you're learning lessons, could you tell us what some of those lessons are and what actual changes they have led to?
Yes, ma'am. You're 100% right. The communication, and same thing with the enhanced power safety settings. You know, when Silverthorne saw the outages for a week straight, the communication was terrible, right? We're good at keeping the lights on. We're not great at communicating, and that is where we're getting better. So this is what we're committed to. Notifications to our emergency managers, those offices, at least 48 to 72 hours in advance. We have, through the wildfire mitigation plan, we have brought on 2 new resilient, I think they're calling them like resiliency people or something, but they're specifically dedicated to working with all of our emergency management offices across the state to make sure that our plans are working with those local plans. That's one. The medical customers, that, the people that need oxygen and things like that, we need to go, and we have been trying to go on an aggressive campaign to get people to sign up for that. We'd like to work with our communities to put that language on your websites and things too, so that they can, they're on the Town of Keystone website, they can click there and it takes them to Excel and they get signed up so that we know that they have those needs. Working with our public health department to identify those folks. Let's see, businesses. Businesses are a huge one for us. We need to make sure that they've got as much of a heads up as possible. Hospitals, critical infrastructure, wastewater treatment plants. We talked about how, the natural gas system and stuff, right? A lot of generators run off natural gas. If we're in the middle of a wildfire, we saw what happened. You saw on that map that we are connected to the Marshall compressor station, right? What does that mean? How do we get those facilities back online as fast as possible? Those are the conversations that we're currently having today, and we're learning. It's not perfect, but it is getting better.
Is there a plan about that that's online someplace?
Yes, I can send, if there's a 100-page document that I can send your way.
I would love that,
Yes,
thanks.
ma'am. Yep. I got 100 pages.
Go ahead.
That's not all I have. Situational awareness is a big tool. We use a software called TechnoSalva that does modeling for us. It talks about potential ignition points, and if it wasn't a potential ignition point with the winds at X, Y, and Z miles per hour, how fast does that spread? Where does it spread? How many homes does it take out? Blah, 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 blah. So situational awareness is a huge one. I'm sorry?
You have 3 minutes.
Hardening of the system. Leave it at that and open it up for questions.
Thank you.
Yep.
Quick question, of the two projects, you said, how much is it gonna cost the consumers per year, each household?
I don't have a good answer for you yet on the Mountain Energy project because the PUC hasn't really given us guidance on what they do feel like they might approve and what they don't feel like they will approve. For the wildfire mitigation plan, we anticipate $9 per bill.
So, per month?
Yes.
For how long?
I think it's a 5-year plan. 5-year plan, and then we'll have to refile with the PUC. And that goes exactly back to our planning, right? It's very hard for us to plan more than about 5 years out on anything because of how regulated we are.
For your PUC filing for the Mountain Energy project, you have 180 some odd $1 million in that whole project, I think. If that were all to be approved, what would be the rate impact?
I don't have that number off the top of my head. I can track it down for you.
Please, I'm interested.
So Summit County is really unique because we have a wildland firefighter team. Are you guys, and there are considerable efforts in Summit County to address the wildfire mitigation community by community and also countywide. Are you guys working directly with our wildland firefighters?
We are, absolutely. I've been living, working, and playing up in Summit County for 20 years. So Jay Nelson is like one of my guys, and I love working with those guys. Our AI cameras, that's part of our plan. That's been a great success story. Brian Bavard, we caught one of those cameras caught a fire in French Creek. Brian got the notification because we do work with the emergency management office as well as the fire teams. He's like, there's no fire up there, no way. And the cameras caught it 45 minutes before the public reported it. I mean, huge success story. But anyway, they all are hooked up to that. So when we get the notifications from our AI cameras, so does anyone that the sheriff's department has given us names for, anyone that the fire department has given us names for, anyone that Brian has given us names for. And then we're also working with them to try to identify the right locations. I think we've got like 90 new cameras proposed in the wildfire mitigation plan. And definitely some of those are for Summit. And working with them to identify the right places there. But it's really strong partners and very supportive of the work.
Sure. Last question.
So quickly, if you can, what is the coverage and the timeline for the AI cameras in Summit County?
It's dependent on approval, final approval from the PUC. Again, off the top of my head, in the plan, there's like about a 90 proposed. They could come back and say, hey, we're not loving 90, go down to 50, or we love these cameras, go up to 150. You know, we're not exactly sure what they're going to come back and say, but as soon as the plan is approved, I would say within the next 6 months, we'll site and get those placed.
And that's specific to Summit County you're talking about?
Not 90,
Yeah, what's that, 94?
statewide.
Okay, so what about Summit County?
It'll probably be in the 2 to 3 range. Again, it kind of depends on what the PUC approves.
Larry, thank you very much.
Thanks for having me, guys. I really
Sorry,
appreciate it.
it's short, but we have another large, long presentation I'm anticipating following.
Well, you all have my business card. That is my cell phone number on there. And it is a little confusing. There is Elizabeth for the email address. You can call me Elizabeth, you can call me Blair. Don't call me too many other things. Thanks, guys.
Thank you for coming in.
Could we ask that get sent out to us so we can have it for our records?
Yeah.
Yeah, so,
Thank you.
thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, the next item is the financial. I'll turn it over to the town manager and finance director.
And I will let our finance director, Fox, lead us through this.
All right, thank you, John. Happy Fox, finance director. So first, I'm going to update you on just some items. Our lodging tax, we have 2 months of collection so far, so that's been going good. January was a little rocky. February has come in very strong. I would say we have about 90% compliance, working on the other 10% of non-filing submittals, but those will come. Some of those folks, you know, with their companies and stuff, are just dialing their process in. And then also, just to let you guys know that all the finances, they're still being outsourced with M&W, but eventually they're going to be brought in-house. The staff did select Cassell for our governmental software company. Our legal counsel did review the contract last week, did some red lines, so now it's with Cassell's attorneys, and hopefully we'll come to a good agreement, and then we can sign the contract, and then after that it says implementation, and that can take several months for them to do it. But in the meantime, M&W, they think they can give me access to their QuickBooks, and then I can start doing everything in-house, almost everything in-house. But in the meantime, it's still going through them.
Why would they not be able to give you access? Why do they just think they can? I don't understand that.
Well, my communication with them was when when we discussed bringing it in-house, I told them that my only obstacle is I don't have a software, and she said that some of their other clients have access to their QuickBooks, so she believed that she could get me access, but it wasn't her call. So it just has to go through the chain of command.
This is why we have a finance director.
All right, so now that we got over those. So what do you guys want me to start with? Do you want me to start with the graphs, or do you want me to start with the financials?
Your choice.
Graphs are fun.
Okay, graphs are fun. There we go. So we'll start with the graphs that are in your guys' packet. The first one is the Summit County Housing Authority. And our Mayor Ken did bring up to me, the totals that you see here are what was deposited into our bank account. And the fee structure that they have, basically in July, we paid them $25,000 for their fees to cover 5 months, the previous 5 months. So the numbers don't reflect that, they just reflect what was deposited into our account. But next time I show this, I'll correct that. So it's kind of cool because you can see our housing authority revenues that are brought in. We don't have February, but you can see January, this January, so you can see March, and then it follows kind of like our sales tax, where, you know, April, May, June, July are a little bit slower, and then it picks up for August, and then it's slow again, and then December's another good month.
May I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
So John, I know the pre-recorded answer I always get when I ask these questions is about the master plan, but I'm wondering if we've started to formulate a plan for how we're going to implement housing authority funds, and if we are going to be able to move forward with some possible programs like deed restrictions prior to the finalization of the master plan.
We are going to be starting, it's running through community development. Andrew will be putting together our affordable housing plan with me. But we need to get the comp plan going off the ground. We will have an affordable housing plan and component this year.
All right, then moving on to sales, let's go.
Sorry, I do have a question. So for February, you mentioned that we don't have February. Is that March encompassing the prorated portion of February that we, I don't want to say should have received, but can we dive into why there's nothing for February?
Yes, because there's a bit of an argument between the town, the county, and Summit County Housing Authority over who was due the 3 weeks in February pay under our agreement, our IGA with the county that only addressed the sales tax. Although previous agreements are the IGA for the Summit County Housing Authority said that funds raised within a community that was not part of the IGA, like we were in February, should be withheld. That money was given to the county, should be held by the SCHA. So it's, we're working through this, but there's SCHA didn't withhold it, they gave it to the county. Yes, this is a complicated situation. The March money does not in any way reflect the February money that was collected in the town of Keystone.
Gotcha. So there's I wouldn't say significant, but there's probably over $100,000 in
117 or 112
in discussion, shall we call it. Okay. Thank you.
All right, and going to sales tax. So we have a full year of sales tax, including this January. So it's nice to kind of see the trends in the amounts that we get for each month. And they should be comparable going forward. So it'll just be nice to see the comparisons as we go forward.
And I'd like to point out, for February, Heike used the data for the full month. That wasn't actually we brought in $380-some thousand when it was prorated, but for comparison purposes, she used the full month.
Thank you, John. I just go everything with John prior to, so if I forget anything, he can interject. He does a good job of that. So the next one is our year-to-date sales tax breakdown by percent. So nothing earth-shattering here. You guys all kind of know that, December, January, February, March are big months for sales tax collection, where the other months are much slower, May being the least amount of collection, which makes sense. Then if you go to the other one, we have the month-over-month industry, and this one's a fun one. It'll be fun moving forward too. Now that we have some data, you can kind of see the different industries: lodging, restaurants, retail, utilities, and then anything else that doesn't fit into those categories. And you can see the month-over-month collection in each industry. Nothing too different from the other reports that are presented. Those 4 months are higher, and the other months are a little bit lower, but then summertime picks up a little bit. The one on the all others, you'll see November is really high, and that is contributed to, there was some large construction sales that happened, and then recreational rentals also contributed to that high number in November for the all others. All right, and then the last one is this industry percent breakdown for 2024. I did include our 2025 January numbers in there just to get a whole year's analysis of this. And as you can see, that lodging is our main producer, producing about 48% of the year's sales tax. And then with 19% all others, 18% is retail, 12% is restaurants. So that's just kind of good information and helps us determine, you know, if we're forecasting or what our numbers are going to be. Any questions on those?
I love your graphs, thank you.
And puts it in layman's terms and says during a spreadsheet.
Actually, for me, it was a nice break to, like, you know, because I've just been dealing with lodging tax primarily since I've started, so it was nice to be like, oh, I gotta do something different now.
Quick question.
Yes.
Where is the, tax on lift ticket? I mean, for sales of tickets for ski? Is that, we don't get anything?
Correct.
I just want to make sure that wasn't buried somewhere.
Yeah.
Lift tickets don't have a sales tax.
If they did, you would definitely, it wouldn't be buried.
Yeah, it probably, it would
Then
be,
my
it would
last
stand
question,
there.
the slopes are closing early, I think, this year compared to some other years. I mean, Creative break, there's nothing. I would think that has an impact, pretty big impact on some of our sales revenues. If it does close a week, 2 to 3 weeks early.
Well, we're actually closing a week later than last year.
But it does have an impact there on.
Oh, yeah, it'll definitely, yeah, it definitely has an
Each
impact.
year.
Because I mean, if you think about it, that's what drives people here. So most people are just looking for a quick getaway with not a whole lot of them. But the great thing about Keystone too is you're not too far from, you know, the rest of the Summit County municipalities. They offer a lot. But yeah, it does have to be an impact.
And if I may, that's, I think, something we as a town have discussed the need to approach is Keystone always used to close in May. Snow's good enough till May. It's a financial decision made by the company, and it makes sense. When it's 90 degrees in the Front Range, people aren't necessarily thinking about skiing. So Keystone, well, Vail Resorts has tended to keep Breckenridge open later than Keystone. Use the Keystone workers over there, direct all their skier traffic over there. I think we as a town should try to push them to flip that around.
And that's the point.
Yeah.
Where I was going.
One thing on that note that fascinates me, Killington, Vermont, is open for golfing, biking, and skiing all at the same time at the end of the season. And being somebody that lives in Colorado, it blows my mind that we don't have anything around here that's kind of like that. So, just a quick comment.
Well, and to weigh in on that, they were blowing the snow off the greens. Just yesterday, I noticed on the river course. And yeah, to me, that's an argument we could use with Vail Resorts. You can throw that triple package at people here in Keystone. You can't do that, and you don't own a golf course in Breckenridge. Let's try to double up. These are just points we can use to try to convince them to.
As I remember, didn't the golf courses here open in early May last year?
I believe so.
So, it's a good point. Go ahead.
And just another fun fact, you know, with our sales tax. So Keystone has a super low sales tax rate. If you go into a store, if you buy construction materials when they get delivered, if anything gets delivered, it's only 6.375%, which is a lot lower than, I'm not sure who's lower, I never really looked into it, but
We're the same as unincorporated Summit County.
it's unincorporated Southern County, yeah, but still, like, if you go to Denver and buy something, you might want to think about, like, just having it shipped up here. And then lodging tax, and that's 8.375%, which is a whole lot less than, other than unincorporated Summit County, the other municipalities in Summit County. Some of them are up to 20%. So, so just good things to keep in mind. All right, so financials, if you go to page 2, and just to talk about some of this. So if you look at the 2 months ended, the budgeted figure that they have there on the right-hand side, basically this is breaking up our budget into 12 equal parts. So basically, if you took a pizza and you cut it into 12 equal parts, saying that each month is the same, that we'll have the same revenue and we'll have the same expenditures, which isn't how we operate as a Keystone municipality. A lot of it has to do with timing, there's seasonality in there. So really what it should be cut up into 12 different slices, but some are bigger and some are smaller. So the reason I bring that up is because when you look at that variance, it's misleading. Because some of these revenues we get quarterly, some of them are on the annual basis, and some are for our expenditures, and so you're going to see those variance amounts, and they might make you pause for concern.
And I'd like to, as we're on the revenue section, we discovered today, well, Heike discovered today a few things about the specific ownership tax, and both specific and auto ownership tax, right, are distributed.
That was my conversation with you today, but I just but it's been a conversation that I've had with others.
Yeah, but it's distributed, it's collected by the state, distributed to counties, and under state law, it's then distributed based on property tax.
I thought that was only for the specific ownership tax. The auto tax was distributed by sales tax.
Right,
Oh,
yeah,
so
so the specific ownership tax is distributed based on your property levy, which we don't have one, so unfortunately we're not going to get that specific ownership tax that's in the budget. And then the auto ownership tax, or the registration fees for the tax, is also, that's based on sales tax. And when I had a conversation with the county, they basically told me that since we don't have our own sales tax, and we just have the IGA that's been in place since like the 70s, that we don't qualify for that. So again, there's a difference of perspective there, just like the Summit County Housing Authority fees, that hopefully we'll be able to work out in time. It's just not going to be
On the auto tax, I would ask you to push back on that, since the county sales tax is, we get our distribution of that, and basically in this case, they're not going to give us their distribution to the county sales tax.
Exactly, but, so I was mistaken, I cleared it up, but auto ownership is something we will be arguing with the county about. A specific ownership tax we will not see because it's state mandated how that's distributed.
Question on this, I didn't see the Excel that there's a few printouts of floating around in the work session PDF. Was that distributed some other way?
Okay.
Oh, yeah, we just got the financials yesterday, so Maddie emailed them out.
Okay, my apologies for not seeing that today.
Yeah, and then so going back to the other tax revenue too, the Highway User Tax Fund, also known as HUFT, the state's fiscal year starts in July, and so we won't be getting that distribution until July. So we'll be a little bit behind on that timing. So just as an overall, we're gonna be fine, we have enough money, but our revenue stream is gonna be a little bit less than what we had anticipated in the budget. But nothing of concern as of this time.
So, what's the pass-through for the highway users tax? And if you say we're gonna catch up in July, are you saying we're going to get August through July? Or also the previous
No,
months?
that's when it'll start, that's when our distribution will start, it'll start in July.
Oh, we don't get anything back. Okay.
That's correct.
But if July is the start date, and we were operating in July of 2024, why didn't we get
It's
that?
because the HUTF funds are based on an inventory of bills as of January 1st of each year. So last year, when the state fiscal year started in July, the town of Keystone had no roads in January 1st of that year.
So the county, starting in July of last year, got the tax money for our roads.
All right, so without some of those additional, other tax revenue, we could possibly show a shortfall of around 100K. But like we discussed, John's gonna have some other conversations just to see if we can get, some of those, through Summit County, so we'll see. Going down the list too, just like as an FYI, the business license was projected at 34,000. In our business license, you guys discussed that we would charge about $50, so those revenues will probably be under our budget as well. So basically, if we, for that $34,000 to come in at $50, we would need 680 businesses to apply for a business license. So we'll see how that goes. Short-term rentals, you see that short-term rentals, even though that's an annual event in September, we have some nice revenue for January and February, 37,000. Maddie has done an excellent job on reaching out to all those folks who haven't been compliant and getting them compliant. So that's nice to see. And then just overall, 17% of our year has elapsed, and we were at 20% of our budget for revenues.
Sorry, what was that gap that you were saying that Gabby's running up against, or trying to pull down? What were you talking about?
Oh, so the short-term rental income is generally an annual event because all those short-term rentals are due in September. But she's been working really hard on getting anybody who hasn't been compliant with paying for their license for the last couple of months. So that's why we have that revenue right now.
Okay.
Makes sense?
Should I done those?
I don't know. We'll turn it over to Maddie.
That's what our technology with Deckard is for. So if we see listings that aren't having a license number or aren't associated with any properties that we can find, we reach out and find out why that is and reconcile that. Usually they need to apply for a new license.
And Heike indicated that we think that we're at approximately 90% compliance right now? No?
Well, that was sales tax. That's lodging tax. Sorry, lodging tax.
Okay, so what did you guys do? Are you using pre-existing short-term licenses or new ones?
It's a combination of both. So it's not, I can come back with more specific numbers at the next STR update. But I would say that most of them have been compliant. There are a couple of odd situations that we're looking into to find out if they're maybe just spoofed listings. So, and it's hard to predict what those numbers are because it's hard to figure out what those listings are.
All right, and going back to the finances, so if you go to page 3, which is all of our expenditures, and so like I said, in the revenues, we're 17% of the year lapsed for our budget, and our expenditures are at 12% compared to budget. So looking good there. There's just some cleanup that needs to be done in our financials, so the next time that they're reported, you guys will see that, but you'll see like the community development wages and also the administrative wages. They got combined this year in the budget, they just didn't get combined in this financial report, but that'll be cleaned up next time. We had a couple miscodings. You'll see the community engagement on page 3, which is line 109 for 22,000. That actually belongs in line item where it's 93, community support, town council. And then the other one is on page 4, line 148 for $10,000. That again should be under the community support, town council at 93. So on the next report, that should be all shown straight. So that's it for the general fund, unless anybody has any specific questions. And then if we go on to the other funds, we've got the work housing fund, which you'll see our revenues there for the housing authority. And then under expenditures, you'll see that the housing authority fee is there, which increased from last year. So as you can see, we'll be over budget this year on that. And on the next reporting, you'll see the workforce housing down payment assistance that was taken advantage of by one of our employees. So you'll see that at the next one. This is another one. So the Conversation Trust Fund, we haven't gotten any distributions from that yet. It is a quarterly one. I did reach out to them to make sure that we are on the list. They did respond that they did not see us on the list. However, we should be on the list, so they're looking further into it. They wouldn't we had to do anything for. It should just automatically come to us. So I'll have more information on that at the next meeting. And then the lodging tax fund. So you can see that for January we collected $259,000 in lodging tax revenue. We don't have any expenditures in that yet. And then so far for February, we're close to about $300,000 in collection. So that's my spiel. So if you guys have any questions or you want me to talk more about anything.
Any questions? Thank you very much. You have inherited a can of worms that you were working through. So the council appreciates that.
And little by little, we're getting there, and so it's the good thing is we've gotten a lot of answers, which is helpful. And you guys now we've been able to pass them on to you, so now you guys are aware, and so hopefully we'll get some of them ironed out, and it'll be smooth sailing.
Great. And now, so I just go straight to the Community Development Director for the presentation from SE.
Council, quick update. Basically, SE is going to give you a presentation of where we are thus far. Last week, SE Group gave the Planning and Zoning Commission an update, and basically what I need you to do is going to be tough. You just got very detail-oriented in our budget. Remember, this is a master plan. It's sort of big picture. We certainly ask questions. We are really in the beginning process with regards to collecting data, analyzing the data, making sure that data is indeed correct, and then we're going to walk you through the next steps. So with that, I promised you updates. This was your first update. Keep you in the loop so Lindsay doesn't go rogue. Dylan, take it away.
Thank you, Lindsay. It's good to be here with you all. Thanks for having us. Let's see, I don't think the mic is, there we go. Okay, we'll try that again. Thank you for having us. It's really good to be here with you all. Let's see. So, as Lindsay said, we're still early on in the process. This is kind of a long-range effort, and it's exciting to kind of get to this point, though. We've kind of wrapped up what we're kind of calling our initial pass of existing conditions analysis. So just kind of taking a lot of data from the county, the state, you all, and kind of synthesizing that to kind of create a little bit of a picture of kind of what does your town look like on paper, right? And some of it, you know, we're still working on with Lindsay and Andrew just to kind of refine little pieces of it here and there, and we'll flag that along the way. And another quick thing I'll just say is we kind of have a lot of slides here, so feel free to stop us on a slide and we can just, you know, take questions slide by slide, as opposed to trying to save them all for the end. So just kind of getting us started, I'm sure this is not news to a lot of you, but it was interesting to learn a little bit about your past. So as you all are probably familiar with, the town, and what is the town now, sort of became a town based on gold rush and timber, but prior to that, it was Ute inhabited lands. And so you can see the bottom map on the left is actually some old homestead sites that was kind of forming in the area during the time of the gold rush and timber mining. And so this picture to the right kind of shows what the area looked like at the time. I think that's interesting to look at where those sort of homesteads kind of formed, because if you were able to zoom into what is now Highway 6, you can kind of see that it almost roughly takes the shape of the town boundaries now, which is kind of cool. So the town's present. So this information we gathered from looking at census data, and one quick little asterisk, because I've had a lot of questions thus far on, and so because you're a new town, we've been looking at census data from two different perspectives. And so sometimes the data shows up in interesting ways, but in existing conditions reports that we shared with the town, we try to make sure that we're flagging along the way which analysis we used. It's a little complicated. Before you all incorporated as a town, there was a designated place in the census boundaries called Keystone, which roughly follows a lot of the town boundaries, but does not include all of the parcels that are within the town's incorporated boundaries. So in some cases, areas where we've stitched together the census block groups to be contiguous with your town boundaries, that is a more accurate snapshot now based on the census's data, but in some areas to garner past trends, to look at demographic trends from, you know, where you were up until now, we're looking at a different geographic boundaries. So just understand that there are some slight differences in population counts. But anyway, that's a little just kind of asterisk. But you have a bit of a bimodal split in your residential population. So you have more permanent older residents and families, and then kind of a younger working population, kind of your, you know, late teens, early 20s, up to early 30s. And it's kind of interesting where there's sort of a, you know, you have folks that are in that middle gap, but for the most part, if you were looking at it as like a chart, it would almost be two ends of the younger population and a slightly older population as sort of two concentrated units with a lower valley in the middle. And then, as compared to Summit County, you have slightly more residents that speak another language beyond English as their primary language at home. It's a little bit more than Summit County on average, and it's just kind of an interesting thing to take note of. And then you also have...
I'd be interested afterwards sometime just understanding the generation of that statistic, because as someone who lives here, that isn't what I see. Right. I suspect that's probably driven by wintergreen somehow.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That was kind of my thought too, but
remember, in wintergreen, most of wintergreen is not in the town.
And that's, so the way you were talking about the census data, I'm not a betting person, but I would hedge a bet that that's probably what it's tied to.
No, I understand that, but it's just, I went through the demographic stuff, the demographer, I went through a corporation, and I understand the challenges you have, but yeah, I'd be happy to, I'm curious, because that certainly would drive my perception of what the town ought to be doing in the near term significantly.
Well, so two things. One, it's 1.5 percentage point difference that we found in the data. And that also would be inclusive of part-time residents as well, which could also be skewing that slightly. So but I'm happy to share the sort of the back-end data with you all. And then, so the other last point on here is that there's a smaller average household size in Keystone as compared to Summit County. So your average household size is 1.4 compared to Summit County is 2.5. And so this kind of also kind of helps round out some of the things that we were just talking about, right? There's sort of the two ends of the population spectrum. And then we were also talking about how there's slightly lower household size. And if you look here, what this is showing you is that you have family and non-family households designated in the census. And so non-family households are one or more unrelated people living together. So that could be if Lindsay and I were choosing to be roommates, say, in a condo in Keystone, we would be a non-family household. Whereas if a family of people that are either related by lineage or marriage move into the same unit, they would be classified as a family household. And so what we're seeing is that, and this is really not super surprising for most of you, I'm sure, but family households in Keystone on average are making slightly more, whereas we have the lower income folks are kind of those non-family, single households. And so it's kind of follows along, your demographic trends as well.
Question on that, and just so I'm understanding, like, the graph doesn't confuse me too much, but I'd like the granular details. Is this income per household or per person in the household?
Per household.
Okay, so even if we had a 20-bedroom house, it would still be kind of the same as if we share a studio.
Right, and that's where it does get a little bit tricky to calculate, because what you're relying on is reporting through the census for households themselves, and you're kind of relying on people reporting their household characteristics accurately. So it can be a little tricky in some resort communities.
Or like you might not know how much your roommate makes, so you might give an estimate if you were the person in your household taking the survey.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Sorry, any other questions on this one? Will we continue forward? Okay. So kind of a slight transition. So this section is kind of more of like kind of trying to capture a little bit of what's happening now as we see it. And so back in February, we did a site visit. We took some photos, and we were trying to get an understanding, right, of what's kind of the style on Keystone, kind of as we're thinking about your land use regulations, zoning, and some of the regulatory environment that you'll be inheriting as a town. What are some things that you want to be thinking about in terms of the aesthetics of the built environment in your community? And we're trying to see, is there a consistent style, right? There's obviously different developments have slightly different touches to them, and they all can kind of have their own unique flavor to a certain degree, but there are some through lines and some consistency that we notice, and I'm calling it mountain style, but obviously we're open to different interpretations. But basically, rustic materials, alpine aesthetics, modern luxury, sort of this timber framing and stonework and metal accents. We were just looking at Brightwood, the new development, and I actually thought it was kind of interesting how they were kind of mirroring some of the similar styles that we were calling out here that you can kind of see in other developments in the community. So it's kind of nice to see how certain developers are sort of already taking notice of different styles, but it might just be interesting to think about as redevelopment occurs or new development occurs in town. Like, what are some aesthetic consistency that you might want to maintain in the community? So zoning, this is where it gets fun. We took the underlying zoning data and we made a zoning map. One thing, I know a lot of you like to get in the weeds, so if you're in the weeds already, one thing you'll notice is that at this particular aspect ratio, one zoning district doesn't show up, and it's a very small amount of your zoned land, and it's agricultural. But generally speaking, this is still kind of trying to encapsulate your whole boundaries as a whole and trying to give you a perspective. So what you can see is that most of your zoned land is planned unit development. And so those are kind of an interesting challenge from a municipal regulatory standpoint, right? PUDs can be amended, they can be updated, but most of the development that's outlined in a PUD is kind of negotiated and forecasted during that subdivision, during that PUD process. And so it's kind of an interesting situation where a lot of the, potential for new development within the PUDs has already been at least outlined in some capacity at the time of those PUDs developments.
And I guess I want to go on record as saying one of my big concerns with the master plan is that we would follow in the suit of the state government by opening our PUDs and possibly opening up ourselves to increase excessive density. I don't know, I want that flag to make sure that that's not something that we're making ourselves vulnerable to if we do make that recommendation to open up PUDs or have some consistency.
Just a point of clarification, are you talking with regards to affordable housing or?
No, just increasing density with like multi-units, possibly, I mean, a lot of the trends in Denver isn't necessarily affordable housing, but they're saying you can put an additional unit on your lot.
Got it.
And I would object.
Yeah, I would ask you to look at the open space. I know that there's county-owned open space in Keystone on the north side of US 6, on the upper corner. That's the way it's listed on the county records. I know there's other open space in Keystone as well. So I would ask you just to look at open space.
And it might be reflected on the land use. Can you confirm, do you have the slides in your packet in front of you, Ken?
No,
Okay.
So when I'm working with the SC group, so is Andrew, with regards to confirming some of these.
Yeah.
Part of it is category, where the data came from. It doesn't always fit, so we are spot checking all the maps. So we're in the midst of checking that.
Yeah, because I know there's open space in the center part opposite Mountain House that goes forward. There's Vale-owned land, but it's open space. I know there's county-owned open space over above West Hills, for instance. At least that's the way it's listed on the GIS.
The next map is a great visual of the open spaces.
Yeah.
And I did have a question.
That's where sometimes it's tricky between land use and zoning. Something would be zoned something else but used for open space.
All right.
And so this is why we like to do a zoning map and a land use map, because zoning shows what are your regulations saying, how these different parcels can be used, now in the future. And the land use is kind of a snapshot of how are things currently being used. And one thing we really like to do is do a comparison of where are there mismatches, like where are there things zoned commercial, being used residential, where are things being used as open space but are zoned for something else. Is that a potential for, losing that open space? And so we just like to flag those mismatches, and we're at the very beginning of just making sure each parcel is correct, which luckily Keystone is small enough that we can kind of check parcel by parcel without too much extra work. So hopefully between the zoning and the land use, we'll catch it.
And I guess the question for our community development director is, if something is currently listed as open space, does that owner of that land have the right to come back and request, say it's in a residential zoned area, request that it goes back to residential?
Yes, unless there's some other mechanism being utilized, but someone always has the right to rezone the property.
Or to ask for it to be, the council would have to approve.
Oh, of course, yes.
All right, so it isn't an automatic.
Oh, absolutely not.
All right. Because something zoned as open space is a significantly different tax hit each year than something zoned residential.
Absolutely.
All right.
So this does transition as well, I think, into land use. And I know, Jonathan, you had a question, so I'll jump to you first.
Yeah, thanks, sorry. I was just, and I don't expect an answer right now, but just one thing that I'd love to understand is when I look at this open space, right, I see three real potentials. Potential development in the future, right, like could a townhome be built here? Developable land into usable parks, public spaces, picnic areas, things like that. And then like the rock walls that is like, sure, you can use that for open space, but it's limited open space use. So I would love to understand when we talk about land use for Keystone in the future, right? Like what could we actually use that land for? I'm looking at some of those open spaces and there's rivers going to them, so I doubt we're gonna build homes or things like that in there, but could that be a park area? Could that be an area where we potentially have fields for sports or things like that? And that might be something you're doing, but that'd be something I'd love to see in the future.
Well, I saw Ken nodding, I'm sorry, I saw Ken nodding along, and I think that's something we were thinking about, especially a little bit hearing out, I don't want to jump too far ahead, but something we heard a little bit at the Rural Technical Assistance Program workshop was, identify needs for some more park space, and, one thing, and there's a slide on this down the road, but, to your point, some of the areas that are open space where, along adjacent to the Snake River, they're wetlands, and so there's, a lot of considerations around, restricting development in those areas, and so that's, but thinking about how those spaces could be reimagined to still allow, some type of use, whether that's park use, right, is something you all can consider, for sure.
That may be something to consider after the comp plan. As you look at a lot of that open space, would we want to approach the owners of that open space and have the town take over ownership of a larger parking trails and open space plan?
Awesome. So one other little thing on the land uses. So this is something, we were able to use county data and some assessor data to go in, and where we couldn't find the perfect land use, we were able to manually add something, but we are, like I said, we're working with Lindsay and Andrew just to kind of ground truth things, because one of the funny things about working in a new town is that you have to kind of create your data sometimes, so that's kind of still what we're doing, but I think this is kind of at 90% completion and gives a pretty good conceptual understanding of what your land use looks like, and it is kind of interesting to see that for the most part you have a pretty good mix of different residential developments, mixed development and condos, townhomes, single family. There's plenty of communities that they're predominantly single family homes, but you all have a nice healthy mix of different housing types, which is really cool to see. And you do have a fairly, for as dense as you are and as small as you are, you do have some significant open space, areas that could be open space for sure. So this is just kind of an opportunity for a little bit of confirmation with you all. But so what we heard in terms of reasons for incorporation, right? And I know you all probably had these conversations a million times, but just for our confidence moving forward, increased negotiation power with entities like CDOT and their resorts, increased influence over US 6 traffic calming efforts, local control over revenue, and local control over development and land use. And so that's kind of what we heard in terms of a lot of the motivations behind incorporation. Does that feel like we're hearing you well? Okay.
And so I would move US 6 safety up into the reasons for incorporation.
Okay.
As the top.
It's right up there. I don't know if it's top.
After walking the Highway 6 corridor before this meeting for an hour to start the connectivity plan, I would have to agree.
We were like, maybe we should probably be wearing high-vis vests out here. But anyway.
And a black jacket at night.
Yeah, usually it's black, it's closed at night.
Right,
Go ahead.
Thank you. So some emerging themes that we've heard just from conversations we've had with many of you, conversations we had during the workshop last week, and so it's just with some initial stakeholders that we were able to have some conversations with up to this point, are US 6 safety, but we agree a major theme. Town-wide pedestrian and bicycle connection improvement. So right, if you're trying to get around town on a bike, it can be a little bit tricky. It was interesting when we were walking the 6 corridor, I noticed some bike racks by the Summit Stage shuttles, and I was like, man, how would you bike over there? I mean, that just would be a little interesting. But anyway, and then locating and defining a distinct town center was something we heard a lot during conversations with folks during the workshop last week. And then sorting town level versus county level services and responsibilities. And I know that's just something that's already ongoing, and I know Lindsay's having a lot of conversations, but just it's an ephemeral problem, I'm sure. And then economic revitalization of certain areas and diversification of different offerings. So understanding like Lakeside Village and some certain areas where it might be interesting to kind of reimagine what those areas could look like in the future. Yes, please.
Can I expand on, I see it
somewhat addressed with locating and defining a distinct town center for Keystone. I think it's important to point out that we need to engage in really responsible and sound municipal planning from A to Z, not just with the town center, but with our other services, with law enforcement and the other elements that play into developing a town. Because so often I see some very individual interests tend towards the transportation, getting tourists in and out. But I think for those of us who live here and are raising our families here, we need to really look at this as municipal planning, holistic municipal planning, not just picking certain elements of it. And I think the town center bullet alludes to that, but I would like to see it expanded.
Yeah, we can make sure that's
And
reflected.
you saw a little taste of that with our Excel Energy presentation, right? Like there's oftentimes a lot of development and expansion without necessarily thinking about the impacts. Oftentimes we've seen that with road congestion and pedestrian safety, but now we're seeing it in a different avenue.
Yeah, for sure. That's great feedback. Thank you. All right. So one thing we kind of started touching on a little bit, but kind of outlining here. So this is some growth and development considerations. We wanted to kind of get an understanding, right, of what is some new development potential. And it's a little tricky to kind of get at this when you have a lot of PUDs, so you kind of have to bury yourself through all the different PUD documents, but then also you can look at different sets of data to try and understand vacant parcels. So this is, so the red here are based on the current data that we have, vacant parcels in the area where new development could occur. And so all of these different parcels are in different PUDs. And so there's different density levels that could be associated with them and different development considerations that could be associated with them. So kind of the next level down is kind of understanding, you know, what are some of the restrictions and what are some of the more specific opportunities that could occur in this new development. But this is just kind of at a high level looking at where is some potential for new development to occur. And one thing I will flag, because this came up in the planning commission meeting, is you'll notice that we didn't include Mountain House, and it's just because as of this time, Mountain House was not incorporated into the town boundaries, so we wanted our initial analysis to just look at, you know, where are the vacant parcels and potential development opportunities in the future within the current boundaries as they are now.
Will it be included though, given that that's a really important thing on our radar that we kind of anticipate evolving quickly? No? Nobody cares about that?
I'm in the beginning of your sentence.
I mean, if we're investing this time in this assessment and this strategy, and we discuss the fact that there's a high probability that Mountain House will eventually become a part of the town, can we do some projections and include that on maybe in the footnotes at some point?
You'll include it probably in your 3-mile plan?
I think at the
Yeah.
3-mile plan, it'll be something we have to look into just because it's kind of right there. But, you know, I think that at this stage, we wanted to, you know, kind of understand within the existing boundaries, right, what does development potential look like. But yeah, the 3-mile plan is something we'll be.
For our clarity, I've heard that phrase, what does the 3-mile plan mean? Is that future possible growth or what?
Great question. So 3-mile plans are plans that go on to long-range planning documents like comprehensive plans that look at what your potential growth or annexation possibilities are within 3 miles of your current town boundaries.
Perfect, thanks.
So, yeah. Okay, so some of the inhibiting factors for growth, obviously, part of the reason we highlighted some of the vacant parcels is you're surrounded by Forest Service land on a lot of sides. You also have some sensitive wetlands that do run right through the middle of your town boundaries. And then also just, you know, thinking kind of strategically about growth as it aligns with your water and infrastructure needs as well. So, you know, this is kind of just, there are some other inhibiting factors too beyond just the 3-mile and growth possibilities as well. So this is a bit of a complicated slide, so I'm happy to like spend a little bit more time on this one, but what we're looking at here is because Keystone, the built environment of Keystone is relatively built out at this stage, right? When we look back here, we see that in the grand scheme of parcels, there's not a lot of vacant parcels left. We started understanding that in communities like that, that probably means that some of your development pressure will come in the form of redevelopment, right? And so what we wanted to look at, obviously we can't control the market, so we don't know which properties will redevelop at what time, but, somehow there we go. Okay. But one thing we can look at is something called a land value ratio. So land value ratio is the assessed land value divided by the assessed total property value. So sometimes that's called the improvement on the land. It's important to kind of understand what the land use is on the land value, because it's common for like a park plan to have a land value of 1, kind of saying that it's really ripe for redevelopment, because the land value is then therefore more valuable than the assessed property value, because there's really no property on it, right? It's a parkland. And so it is obviously not all lands are ripe for redevelopment, right, or should be redeveloped, right? It's good to understand the context, but this is looking at, based on the assessed land value and the assessed property value, the darker green areas are kind of highlighting where it's possible that the market might be signaling potential for redevelopment in the future, right? Where basically the assessed land value, or sorry, the assessed improvement on the land, so maybe that's a commercial business, or maybe it's a car wash, or whatever it be, is really not outperforming its land value, and is therefore potentially going to be redeveloped in the future. That's usually kind of a signal.
Yeah, I would ask you to take a look at what's classified as open space. A lot of the land in here that you show up as high potential is either easements, like in the whole north end piece that runs along the Snake River there, from the stables area all the way down to almost all of Mountain House. That area is all open space, and there's a public easement of 50 feet on both sides of that area, so that can't be developed.
Right.
But that's certainly potential for park space. And again, as you get down into the eastern side, you have some of the same issues as well. So if that's pulled out of it, it gives you a different picture.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's something we can do in the next level down, is kind of removing some of those open space parcels, so it paints a bit more of a clear picture in terms of where there is that higher, where there is that land value that's suggesting potential for redevelopment is a bit more accurate in terms of the property on it is actually open to being redeveloped. And part of the reason we're thinking about this now at this stage is, as redevelopment occurs, right, what do you all be thinking about as a town, that you might be thinking about with your land use regulations that you might want to be codifying or getting ahead of, right? Okay, so kind of transitioning here a little bit. So pedestrian and bicycle opportunities, obviously, we understand that the sidewalk gap is pretty dramatic, but some other things that came up, where there might be some short-term opportunities for improving some of the amenities along existing rec paths and existing trails. So something that came up was potential for some pedestrian amenities along the Snake River, the rec path, the Snake River rec path, like maybe some opportunities for some more benches or trash cans, and some clearer wayfinding opportunities. So in some areas, it's maybe a little confusing in terms of like where you should turn or where you should go, or maybe it kind of turns into a road for a small section and then kind of turns back into the trail. So in some of those areas, just making it a little bit more clear for people that are either walking or biking to be able to get around. So those could be some more short-run opportunities. And then some other things that kind of came up were, this was, when I say came up, this came up during last week's workshop. It was 2 weeks ago, I guess, the workshop. What is time anymore? Was, the rec path on the south side of town is very successful and, well utilized, but, crossing 6th is a barrier except for some of the areas where there's the underpasses. And, in terms of, connecting people on the north side, something that came up from some of the people that attended the workshop was the potential for a north side rec path, and kind of having more like a perimeter trail was what it was called. So the opportunity to kind of have these two areas on either side of Highway 6 that are, more focused on pedestrian and bicyclists that, could kind of loop together and be sort of away from the road. So this was just a map that was put together looking at.
Could I ask to go back?
Oh, please, yes, sir.
I love the map that you have here. Was there a plan to look at the connection between the ranch and other more isolated parts of town? Because I think that there's a great potential for reviewing those trail networks as well.
I think that's something we can look into for sure.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Yep, thank you for that. So this map, these dots show recent crash history, looking from 2019 to 2023 along Highway 6. Obviously, you can see that there's a lot of dots. And as you get from towards the green dots, actually, it's kind of kind of a weird scale, but as you get towards the green, you see that those are more severe crashes. So it's just kind of an interesting way of showing where some of the safety concerns are, and it kind of reinforces some of the needs for more traffic calming measures along 6, and reinforces some of the needs for safer pedestrian crossings over 6 as well. So we're looking forward to getting more in the weeds on the connectivity plan as well. Okay, and this one, sorry, these graphs might be a little complicated to see from this vantage point, but these are we're just trying to understand what the state of housing affordability looks like currently. So we looked from 2019 to 2024 at the median home prices. And so single-family home prices have soared a little bit more dramatically than condos and townhomes. Interestingly enough, both condos and townhomes and single-family homes have both seen an increase in their median home value. But single-family home values have almost doubled from 2019 to 2024. And so median single-family home prices now are a little over $2 million. And for a condo or a townhome, median family home price is around $840,000 or so. And what this graph on the right-hand side is showing is basically these are different area median income levels. And so on the far right, that's 200% of the area median income, and on the far left, it's 60% of the area median income. And so for a typical household in Keystone, basically if you're not making about 200% of the area median income, you would struggle to afford the typical, for the median price of a townhouse or condo. So it's kind of a lot of information for just the user.
Yeah, what I'd like to see also is what the same type of information for deed restricted housing.
Yep.
Because that's really, unfortunately, the target for most of our workforce.
Yeah.
As you've shown here.
Right, yeah, that's a good point, Ken. So the 60%, 80% AMI categories here, so on the far left, the yellow gap there, that would be the delta that a typical household would need in order to be able to afford a median price home. And so, to your point, deed restrictions are kind of a way to kind of help make up that gap. And so Keystone is kind of in an interesting position right now where, as of now, you have 787 deed restricted units. 536 of those, so the majority, are for Vail Resorts employees, but there's an additional 243 that are restricted at the between 60 and 100% AMI for people that are employed full-time locally in Summit County. So that is a bit interesting. So this kind of shows it a little bit more. So as you can see, the median rent in Keystone is $861, which is kind of interesting. It kind of does show that for a lot of the rental units, the deed restrictions are kind of helping pull down some of that median rental price. So the deed restrictions are working, right, in that sense, that they are a useful tool for helping preserve some degree of affordability, especially when you...
Is that 861 per household or per individual?
That's associated with rents themselves, so based on the market rate rent. Yep.
And do you consider employee housing in this, even though that they don't have a lease and they don't have any legal protections?
It's complicated how it's involved in there, so you'd have to ask our economic sub-consultant on how that data gets reflected in there, but...
My guess is it is a mix, otherwise I think the number would be much higher if this
Yeah.
did not
I would like
include
to see-
employee housing or deed restricted units.
I would like to see the Vail housing pulled out of these numbers and listed separately, because the only ones who have access to the Vail housing are Vail employees.
Yeah.
So
Right.
as a result.
We'll see if they'll give it to us.
What I will say, so in our the memo that we put together regarding housing, which goes into a bit more detail on this particular topic, it's also kind of serving as sort of the initial foundation gathering for what will be the housing needs assessment that'll get started here soon and start to go for the next couple of months, which will be running in tandem to the comprehensive plan process. So we did break out. We have an understanding of the unit mix between Vail Resorts restricted deed units and non-Vail resorts, but I think your point is well taken, Ken, that because they're kind of isolated to a certain group within the town, it's probably good to pull those out more specifically.
And I'd also ask, right, one of my questions for the previous slide is the 243 mostly West Hills for those non-Vail Resort housing units, basically? So yeah, and that's not a shock, right? But then that goes to a larger question of long-term livability in these affordable housing units, right? If it's all Vail Resorts housing, there is less long-term livability in those places by design than one might hope. So that's another thing I'd like to see is the long-term livability and growth in the community, right? What does that look like? Are these affordable housing units designed for seasonal workforce that might be transient and move on to the next area, or is it meant to grow a family with to live long-term in our community?
The challenge we have is that the Vail housing largely is designed to support a seasonal requirement, not a year-round requirement. And Vail has, as I think, correct me if I'm wrong, John, that has a requirement that if you are a longer-term employee, you have to be out of that housing within, what, 2 years?
There is restrictions on housing based on departments. Yeah. So across the board, if you live in management housing, which is Sunrise 2A, there is a general rule of 2 years, and that's across the company. And unless that's changed since the last time I knew, that's the 2-year mark. And then that can even be restricted further based on departments. So, for example, if ski school determines that they are going to use their allotment of bed space for one season only for the first time and for folks that are certified in certain levels, right? They can put on a restriction of certain seasonal requirements. And then on the flip side, right, they could also say that this high potential employee has been with us for 10 years and we're going to offer it to them for a couple of years. It's really dependent on the department, the situation of the people, but generally there is a max of around 2 years. So there's no one Vail Resort policy that I know of at least that this is exactly how housing is applied across the board.
And Ken, I remember when we met with you at our site visit, you also said that it's Vail employee housing, but they're not necessarily working at Keystone. They could be taking the bus to rec every day.
152 slots are allocated for.
How many?
152, I believe, is allocated.
Are slotted for Keystone Resorts?
No, for outside Keystone.
For outside, so you do have some cross traffic.
There's some cross traffic.
Okay.
And there's some housing that's allocated as well for Arapahoe Basin because they help build.
Right, okay.
I think Lindsay can give you the breakout of that in the PUD.
So one thing, I think it's interesting to see these two side by side, the median rent versus the median home price, and kind of showing how deed restrictions are working as a tool for preserving some affordability.
The trouble is, it's so skewed by the Vail housing.
Yeah.
That doesn't reflect deed restrictions at all. The largest rental area in Keystone is Wintergreen, but one bedroom is 2,100.
Right.
And that's before parking and utilities and anything else they want to throw on that one.
All right.
What's the AMI figure you used? To do the math backwards.
Yeah, that's a good question. I would have to look.
Well, I can catch you later.
I think I can.
It's probably in the larger memo.
Yeah.
What was your question, Carol?
What AMI figure are they using?
You could, what I always do is I Google HUD, AMI 2024, and then the count, because it changes every year, because HUD makes their estimates change every year too, so. And then the chart will come up.
Okay.
Why don't you get that information to us later? We're really pressed today.
You got it. Yeah, the actual figure is in our existing conditions memo, so that has a longer information on that. So I shared that with Lindsay. I think you can share that with you as well. Okay, so this one was just looking at revitalization opportunities. Obviously, sort of the big one that has come up so far, just in stakeholder conversations, is looking at Lakeside Village and kind of thinking about how it might be a little bit more successful. And increasing the use of potentially the conference center is something we heard that it's not necessarily being utilized as well as maybe it could be. And then also just, something that came up during the workshop last week was considerations for maybe some town rec center opportunities or a community hub, some things that are missing that you might find in a community of this size. So, okay, trying to speed up here a little bit, just recognizing the time crunch. So this is looking at the natural environment. As you can, so the map here is showing the wetlands that are existing both in town and kind of draining into the town. You're surrounded by Forest Service land. One interesting consideration you have, and I know you're all thinking about this, and it came up in the Excel presentation earlier, is wildfire, right? Summit County did a community-wide or county-wide wildfire risk assessment, and so the area that is the Snake River Basin that is now includes the town of Keystone was considered to be moderate to high risk for wildfire. So as you're thinking about the impacts of what the U.S. Forest Service is doing, what the long-range plans are, it would just be important to think about wildfire mitigation. And as you're thinking about development considerations for new development, right, that they're planning for home hardening, defensible space, things of that nature, just to make sure that they're well prepared for potential risks. So another thing that I learned, and I'm sure is not news to you all, is that the Snake River is very highly contaminated. In fact, one of the most contaminated rivers in Colorado, just due to the long history of mining up in the Brew Creek drainage. And so I understand that there have been historic efforts to try and revitalize the river and improve water quality and improve habitat. So I think opportunities as you all are working with different stakeholders and partners in the town to continue those efforts could be great. I know Scott Price has mentioned that several times, that that's something he would love to see. So let's see, and then the high concentration of wetlands does create an interesting opportunity for you all. In some ways it does kind of restrict some development potential, but I think in a way it's an opportunity. It's beautiful areas adjacent to a rec path could present something we were discussing earlier, interesting opportunities to think about them as potential open space areas or areas for future consideration.
Quick question on the contamination.
Yeah.
Is there, in future iterations of this, will we be able to see statistics on potential impacts of this? Because in my mind, right, remediation efforts are going to cost money. And so if we have statistics that X% of our population is seeing this trend in medical issues, or X% of our population is experiencing high rates of this, then I think we would be able to argue for more focus and financial resources for that.
Do you want to answer it, or?
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, what they're specifically talking about, the Snake River, it doesn't impact the water supply at all. It's totally different for that.
So there's no possibility that could get into our...
They're not, it's totally different operator.
And that's also just a little bit beyond the scope of a conflict.
Fishy in use in the water, but it's really fishy.
Yeah, we at the comp plan level, we can kind of, it might be something that we might want to signal that there's things to look into, and that's a big bag of worms.
Yeah, and the remediation they're talking about is all Upper Snake and North Snake River, Brew Creek coming down, probably the biggest contributor to that into the community. And there was significant work done with Penn Mine, so I don't know how old your data is, and because they have been taking fish counts for years, and I just haven't seen the latest ones.
Yeah, so I know that there are fish on the North Fork of but for the most part on the South Fork. The South Fork, it's.
But they were taking actual fish counts annually. I don't know if they still are, and that'd be interesting to see if the Penn Mine remediation had any impact long term.
That's something we can look into. So these maps are showing wildfire risk, and this is just kind of highlighting, I'm sure this is something you all are very aware of. So the map on the left came from the Summit County Wildfire Task Force. And so this area in yellow and the areas in red you're starting to see areas where you're having increased risk for wildfire. So as you get closer into the town, it is a little bit higher risk. And so the map on the right is just kind of showing, so the wildland-urban interface, one of the analyses associated with that is looking at replacement value of your existing infrastructure adjacent to areas that are prone to wildfire risk. And so you can see that the areas in purple here, because you're a fairly dense town, you do have a lot of concentrated utilities and infrastructure. The replacement value is exceedingly high. So for new development, redevelopment projects, any ways that you can be codifying mitigation efforts for home hardening, home defense, and setbacks, that you're just helping increase the probability that you won't have a major disaster on your hands when it comes to replacement value for your infrastructure. So you're very blessed as a town to have a lot of recreation opportunities sort of just right out your back door, right? You have quite a lot of trail miles for non-motorized trails, a few motorized trails, and you have a lot of Forest Service lands and a ski area next to you. One thing that we've started identifying is that there's a bit of a gap for smaller sort of community serving park space, so areas where there might be like a playground or a rec center or like a ball field or something like that. It's probably worth considering what is something that you want to make sure that you feel like you have in town versus what's something that's maybe more regional in nature, right? But it is something that is sort of missing from the park space. And because your demographics do suggest a high amount of younger single workers, it could also be interesting just to think about what are some of the needs that they might have that they feel like they have to travel a little further afield to access.
It'd be interesting to see the analysis once you take the young single workers who are here seasonally in the summer, in the winter out of it, what that high concentration looks like. I don't know what the real mix would be in the summer. You might have a better feeling, John.
Yeah, there's still a lot of people that utilize those bed spaces over the summer that might not be necessarily those other employees. I mean, there's a lot of people that come through town,
So some of the other ways that we were kind of informing our existing conditions understanding was we did a site visit. We were lucky to have Ken kind of tour us around. I don't know that we would have had the same experience without him, so that was really awesome. And then we also had the opportunity to talk to a few folks that are, very involved in the community at this stage, and just having some initial conversations and trying to get a better understanding of what's kind of going on. So some of the folks that we met with thus far, Heike, Mark Matthews from Keystone Neighborhood Corporation, trying to understand the HOA perspective, Scott Price from the Snake River Water District, and Grant Anderson and Karen Bordelais from CDOT, just because transportation is becoming quite an emerging theme, and the safety is a big deal. And then we met with Melissa Shearburn from Barron. So I'll cover just some key takeaways that I took from our notes from these meetings, but Gabby and Lindsay were in these meetings as well, so I invite you all to chime in and anything that didn't get covered that you feel was important. Some things that came up was that there's a need for more affordable housing for the middle income levels, and when we looked at the housing data, that kind of bore out for us as well. And to Ken's point about how a lot of the deed restricted housing units are, for Vail Resorts employees, so in terms of that middle affordable housing gap for folks that are living here part-time or full-time, it's pretty hard to kind of break into the market. Improving circulation between a lot of the existing developments would be important. A lot of the developments kind of operate sort of almost like in their own little universe in some degree, and trying to get in between the different developments is a little bit tricky. So improving that connection. Keystone can be very seasonal, something that we've heard. It'd be great to expand some of the primary business options to attract more year-round employment and or some remote workers that might want to relocate to the area. The Snake River Water District has some long-term infrastructure replacement needs that they're thinking about, and they're hoping that they can be coordinating with the town on for, as you're going through your capital project list and your capital project investments in the future, and just thinking about how they can dovetail with you. So specifically along the rec path and some bridge improvements are kind of what they're thinking about. So CDOT was an interesting conversation. We learned a little bit about their perspective, and so they were fairly encouraging, in my opinion, about trying to think about the right-of-way and from the town's perspective. They're of the mindset that they kind of manage curb to curb, and anything in the right-of-way is on the town, and they understand that that US 6 is a bit of a nightmare from a pedestrian standpoint, but from their perspective, they're focused on the traffic throughput. So, yes, please, Carol.
Quick question. Who were those two people?
Grant
What
Anderson.
department did they come out
Grant Anderson and Karen Borla, so they work in Region 3. Grant's lives in
He's the
Southern.
local engineer,
Local.
what's his exact,
Yeah.
I can't remember exactly. He basically manages a lot of CDOT projects in Summit County, and then Karen Bordelais is more of the regional IMTPR, multi-county. She's responsible for a lot of grants and oversight. We can give you their names if you're
No,
interested.
that's good.
Okay,
That's all I need.
yeah.
There's a lot of attention paid to the transportation issues, which are obvious, but one of the things that I don't see on this has to do with parking, because it really greatly impacts our transportation plan and flow. And one of the things that we inherited from the county was the required number of parking spots per unit, which I think is a huge issue in Keystone, and I'm wondering if there's going to be a parking survey or some recommendations done in relation to not only the existing private parking spots and employee housing, for instance, where they provide employee housing, but then pay charge exorbitant rates for additional parking spots, and then across the resort in terms of parking needs and how it influences the surrounding neighborhoods.
I'm gonna answer that one.
Please.
Well, we were talking, we definitely know parking's an issue. I feel like we're just starting to understand that more deeply. Another concern about parking is there's a lot of parking lots that are actually going to be developed in the next few years. And so that'll even further reduce parking supply. We don't have an entire parking study in our scope, but I think with our transportation consultants, we can, dig a little deeper than where we are now and start to make some recommendations about what to do next to be a little bit more prepared on the parking front. And certainly on the land use side in terms of parking minimums or parking, when it's in the PUDs, that's part of the PUD, we can't really change that, that's already.
But if we want to make recommendations.
Right, but we can make recommendations for the other zone districts, we can make recommendations for if you're gonna open the PUD and renegotiate some part of the PUD, maybe parking's on that list, whatever it is, we can make some recommendations towards that. I didn't realize until you just mentioned it that they charge extra money for parking spots at the employee housing.
Well,
That's wild. Yeah.
it's in deed restricted winter green.
Right. No, it makes sense, but I just didn't know that until
Yeah.
right now, so, which makes it even more expensive to live in.
Employee housing does, but they're very reasonable. I think the last
Oh,
time
okay.
it was $25.
Oh, okay,
Very reasonable.
okay.
The winter greens.
And then
Winter green, not the band.
winter green is
Got it.
$150 per parking spot.
Wow, yeah.
Which doesn't match occupancy, and I park at the bus stop every day with my child, and I see cars coming out with those obnoxious stickers that they've graffitied these cars with that they can't get off all winter because they're just choosing not to pay for the parking.
Yeah. And also, the other thing with parking is that, I like to use this term like the park once environment. And it would just be much more pleasant experience for residents, for visitors, if you're not making every single trip is a less than 1 mile car trip. And so being able to park once when you're visiting or have your parking spot in your home, but you're not necessarily using your car for every single time you're running an errand, every single time you're going to work, every single time you're picking your kid up at school, and just that's a parking issue that also relates to all the other connectivity issues that we were talking about. So we'll certainly have some ideas and recommendations in the plan, but parking for sure.
Yeah, as Valerie pointed out, there's two parking issues. One is the parking lot issue you identified. The other one, I think Valerie's talking about, is the requirements for parking spots per car in particularly the Keystone PUD. The requirement there is one per unit.
You say they're too low or they're too high?
It's ridiculous, it's too low. It's not
So
realistic.
you have a 4-bedroom house, the requirement is 1.
Well, I think again, if you're talking condos predominantly, the issue is, and in condos, it's 1 per condo.
And it's regardless of the bed.
Regardless of the
Right.
bed size.
Right.
Now, many of the condos have more parking spots than that, but that was the minimum requirement.
Right.
for PUD. And that particularly plays out in Lakeside Village and in River Run. I think most of the outlying condos have more than was required. But not certain, like mine, I think is about 1.5. But for seasonal folks, it's not bad.
Except during high season.
We don't have a problem, we don't have a parking problem in high season.
Parking problems otherwise, from these things.
Yeah, but
Parking is such an interesting
Yeah.
kind of, yes. But but yes, the long story short is we'll examine parking as it relates to those two components. So some additional things that we learned, so kind of continuing with the CDOT training, so something we learned that was kind of interesting is that your neighbors to the north, the town of Dillon, is working with CDOT, that they have some long-term plans in place around some roundabouts. At some key intersections along Highway 9. And so CDOT was wondering if, they were wondering if that's something that you all thought about or something that you all are considering as well.
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, so.
The Dillon ones are on hold
Because,
because the Dillon ones were planned because of the housing they were doing in conjunction with the US Forest Service.
oh, and that's on hold because of federal.
Well, it's all sensitive.
Right, okay, interesting.
Yeah, that makes sense. Also, so another thing that we learned was that CDOT's aware of some of the traffic backup concerns that's happening with regards to getting into River Run, and understanding that that's become quite a problem, especially from Friday through Sunday. And so, Vail Resorts maintains their access permit, and so CDOT's kind of just tracking alongside, and that could be something that they go back and ask Vail to, redo a portion of their access permit.
Could you explain what that access permit is, please?
Yeah, so basically the access permit is looking at peak demand for parking spaces and what the traffic congestion that will look like associated with that. And so that's a process they get approved by CDOT and have their engineers look at. You probably know better than I do. Do you want to explain?
I don't know how an access permit gets revoked, or they say, oh, you're having 10 times more traffic, you need an extra turn lane, or, whatever it is, that's reassessed.
Is process a good word to like put in my mind, like the process for me to get into the parking lot is the access permit?
Yeah, kind of. The access permit is something that's granted from CDOT as part of the development process as well, and so it's kind of tethered to the development, but it can be re-looked at or re-examined under certain.
So a good example right now is like the Highway 91 copper entrance, which has been crazy this year. And it's right under the threshold of forcing copper to basically build the light. And right now Copper has said it's more cost effective for them to put cones out, hire 5 people, hire a sheriff to be there, all weekend than to invest in a whole new light. They don't really want to go there, but at some point that's going to be forced. Like if they continue to expand terrain, they continue to have more visitors, at some point their access permit off the highway, CDOT will force them to build a signal. But right now they're kind of right at the edge.
Is that access permit based on traffic study?
Based on traffic study data. So when we did the Bergman Bowl expansion, we did a traffic technical report to kind of understand how visitation patterns might change. And, we documented how much worse traffic was going to get, but it didn't necessarily affect, because that was a different permission process through the Forest Service. It wasn't necessarily a CDOT, even though we worked with CDOT to understand that. CDOT wasn't, that didn't trigger them to say, oh, we should re-examine this access permit right now,
Yeah, I would recommend that you take a look at the existing traffic study that was done in 1994, which is the one that guides all of that within Keystone, and just give us a empirical assessment of whether that's still valid or not. Because that would be an interesting discussion between us, CDOT, and the resort.
Well, then you have a little more data to maybe arm yourself with.
Correct.
Some advocacy.
We're happy to look at that. So some other things that came up, this was kind of an interesting point of conversation, was so CDOT maintains some regional transportation systems through their snow staying and bus staying. And so existing snow staying route does include a stop at Hay Basin. And so they were curious if that's something that the town would be interested in working with CDOT on, is maybe having a potential stop for a snow staying route in Keystone, which would serve obviously folks coming from the front range, so it could help with potentially alleviating some regional traffic congestion, but just an interesting point of conversation. And then so other things, so kind of transitioning to our conversations with Vail Resorts. So this was something that I found kind of optimistic in our conversation with Vail Resorts, is that they are of the mindset that their resorts tend to thrive when the communities that their resorts operate in are thriving. So to me, that was a positive sign that, for you as the town wanting to invest in your community is something that they would be generally in support of, because that's going to be, something that would benefit them downstream. That's kind of a very high level thing, but that's my takeaway from the conversation. They're also very much signaling that they're open to collaboration, and they seem also very interested in understanding some of the community's priorities. So I think keeping them involved as stakeholders throughout this process is going to be a good way to continue to build that trust with them as well. So that's something that we're planning on doing, is continuing to have conversations with their resorts throughout this process. Okay, how are we doing on time, Ken? Because we have some initial recommendations we came up with, but
We're already blowing our agenda totally.
Okay.
And I know the town manager has, how many more slides do you have?
Let's see, we have 3, but
Finish them and then we'll come back.
Okay, so just some high-level things. A lot of this transportation-related stuff is stuff that you all are very aware of in terms of safety, but some other things that came up, transportation demand management strategies, so looking at ways to kind of leverage your existing parking lots more effectively, right? Maybe some congestion pricing, paid parking, or more, town, city, like transit networks that maybe could be serving some of the developments within Keystone to kind of help with some of the local traffic. So there's some opportunities with transportation that are kind of beyond sort of the bigger scale safety issues and looking at a little bit more micro strategies. Some land use stuff, developing a simple approach to land use that cleans up some of the tangle of the PUDs. PUDs can be a little bit of interesting kind of rabbit hole to go down, and I'm sure many of you have tried to look at some of the existing PUD documents. It can be kind of tricky, so just thinking about a longer term land use strategy that maybe is trying to be a little bit more holistic and kind of looking a little bit beyond some of the PUDs. Open lines of communication between utility providers and planning. I know that's something that's come up in the planning commission meetings, is thinking about forecasting utility providing and water capacity for growth. So just kind of making sure that your long-term capital planning is kind of well dovetailed with your land use planning. Incorporating resiliency, right, as we looked at with some of the wildfire maps. Wildfires, going to be probably something that you will have to struggle with throughout your time as a community, unfortunately. But the best way to kind of get ahead of some of that is building in some resiliency into your land development regulations and some resiliency as a town. And then also something that might be a bit next level down from the comp plan is commissioning capital asset inventory, just to really fully understand some of your maintenance liabilities and infrastructure obligations that you all have inherited as a town. And then some parks and recreation trails, some initial recommendations we have, and again, these are just kind of, as we're looking at some of the data, this is just some initial thoughts that come to mind. So reviewing some of the existing sidewalks and multi-use paths to understand some short-term interventions, like maybe some potential wayfinding improvements, some potential amenity improvements like potential water fountains or benches, things, trash cans, things of that nature. And then just kind of also maybe something that could also be done relatively soon after this process is trying to understand what are some recreation amenities that you all want to have locally, and then what are some things that you think are better served regionally. So just to try and kind of fill some of those recreation gaps that you might have currently. Okay, and then environment. We talked about wildfire and some home hardening and building code considerations, and then also continuing to have open lines of communication with the Dillon Ranger District on forest health and thinning projects. Considering reviving some of the conversations with the Snake River Watershed Task Force, and continuing the inertia and the momentum around some water quality improvement on the Snake River. And then one other thing that you might consider down the road is working with Summit County on a transfer development rights program, which would allow for some negotiations around concentrating development in some areas and being able to conserve some other areas as well. So kind of just an interesting regulatory tool. But sorry, I kind of sped run through that, but I'm feeling the time pressure. So.
Any last questions?
This is awesome.
Thank you very much for the update. Recognize it's preliminary. There's a lot of data gathering and assessment to do. As Lindsay's shaking his head.
Right, and we still have quite a bit of time left in the arc of this project. So I think it's exciting that we are where we are in the project, but it's also kind of exciting to be continuing to look ahead at all the next steps in the engagement that we'll be doing that coming. So thank you.
Again, thank you.
Thank you.
And I want to, as we're going forward, I want to ask before, because we're right in the middle of dinner time, but I'd like to ask the town manager, 3 of the items on the agenda, I think could probably be handled in the town manager's update, the liquor code legislative update, the refuse container grant update, and the discussion on the council retreat. That be handled in the town manager's update.
Certainly the refuse container and the council.
Yes, we are.
All right, I will call the meeting back to order, and I'll turn it over to the town manager.
And I'm going to pass it right on to our town attorney to discuss the municipal court, RGA, who represent.
Good afternoon, Town Council, Jennifer Madsen, the Town Attorney. So in your packet, you have a staff report which provides an overview of the municipal court IGA. Essentially, this is an agreement between Silverthorne, Dillon, and Keystone for a combined municipal court. And what this is really Keystone joining the combined municipal court that Silverthorne and Dillon already have in place. It would be operation of one court for all 3 municipalities. You would have one municipal judge, a municipal court clerk who is responsible for making sure that the court is run pursuant to Colorado law, and also one prosecutor handling all of the cases. The staff report in the packet really went over the overview of the IGA. I'm not going to go into too much detail. One thing to note is that, well, a couple things to note. You will need to, if you want to move forward with this, town council would need to appoint the municipal court judge by resolution. You need to approve that person. Another thing that might be important is that related to the financial arrangements, my understanding is currently there's 2 components to the financial arrangement for Dillon and Silverthorne. There's a fixed cost arrangement and then a per fee arrangement. I understand that Keystone will not be responsible for the fixed cost portion because right now there isn't data to support that apportionment of those costs. We don't know how much of the docket is going to be made of Keystone tickets, but the fixed cost is about it's about $95 per ticket for that per ticket cost, not the fixed cost. So that's a quick overview, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Councilmember Sullivan. First question is judge selections. I said up front, they have a judge already.
Correct.
And so we are basically accepting their action.
Yes.
For the judge and the prosecutor, you know, especially in the news, you see a lot where people start to question how lax a judge is, how harsh they are. Have we interviewed, do we know anything about the judge and the prosecutor?
I know that John does. I would definitely, I think it's a good step for you all to be acquainted with the person and have the judge come in at a work session and maybe just speak to you about his philosophies and managing court practice and how he handles his dockets, that type of thing. But I know that John has some knowledge of him.
The municipal judge is Ron Carlson. he's been or was an attorney in Summit County for as long as I lived here, at least. He retired, somewhere between 5 and 10 years ago from active practice of law, still continues to be a municipal judge in numerous communities. He's a really good guy, a really intelligent guy, a guy who was not afraid to assess my son and our county judge's son with penalties in municipal court ones. So he's fair and unbiased. I think we'll bring him in and you can meet him, but I don't think any of you will have any problem with Mr. Carlson.
And you do have, it's important that you have the ability to terminate the judge and get out of the contract if something happens. And
But then
so
the IGA goes away.
it does, yeah, it does. The IG's in place, IGA is in place with the understanding that you will have the same judge.
And the prosecutor?
Correct. And John knows, I think you know the prosecutor, don't you?
Oh, yeah, the prosecutor is Mark Hurlbert, who actually used to be the 5th district attorney up here until he was terminated. Once again, a long time Summit County person, raised his kids here, they went to school with mine, his oldest, and he's a lot of experience as a prosecutor. He was the elected DA for the county, or the district.
I just wondered, do you know, are municipal judges required to be attorneys in Colorado?
They're required under our home rule charter to be an attorney.
That's not my question.
No,
No.
correct, yeah.
John?
Thanks. You kind of talked about this during your presentation. I'm really questioning this ticket or per ticket processing fee at $95.39. Do we have any indication of where that comes from? So what, I guess digging into it, what I'm seeing is we're sharing the cost of operating the court, right? Or eventually we will, but Dylan is sharing that currently, right, with 52% of total cost based on historical case volumes. So why is there an additional per ticket processing? Is there a state fee? Is there, like, how do we justify it?
Okay, so the fixed cost goes to the judge's salary and the prosecutor's fees. So the judge is going to be paid for court appearances, prosecutor is going to be paid for court appearance. Also, court supplies are included in that fixed cost. The per ticket cost is going to be your other employee expenses related to handling tickets. So you have other employees who manage the court, manage the docket, have to be there during the court day. So that's what the per ticket cost is.
And that, sorry, Dan, that makes sense, but it's high in my opinion, but if our police department writes 100 tickets, regardless of if they go to court or not, we would be responsible for 100 times 90.
No, it's only the tickets that are on the docket. So
Okay.
one of the things that this agreement does specifically call out is a penalty assessment process. That's going to be something that the town is going to have to put in place, but a lot of times what happens, if you get a ticket, a speeding ticket, and it says you pay in advance, you can pay in advance, here's the cost to pay in advance, and it'll automatically be reduced by a point. Those tickets are not included in this per ticket cost, and the combined court will not process those tickets.
So it's only the ones
Keystone
that
is going
go
to
to
process
court.
it, yes.
Gotcha, thank you.
Real quick, what's an average ticket?
I knew you were going to ask that question, and I was kind of scrambling to figure it out. I think it's going to be maybe $125. So you're not going to get much from each ticket.
Here's the problem. When you look at the number of tickets that were allocated for Dylan this last year, this year, determining the fixed cost, that were out there. Based on that analysis, the total cost per ticket was $95.39 for the per ticket cost and $62.84 for the fixed cost allocation of that if you assume the number of tickets. So the actual cost per ticket is $158. Is any of that, or any of those fees considered court costs that would be added on to the fine?
That's not my understanding of how it works, but I can ask for clarification on how that works.
Because I believe our municipal ordinance talks about court costs.
We can have court costs. We can definitely add court costs. $30 is a typical, $25, $30 is typical for court costs, so I can ask how that works.
When the actual court costs are up in the 150 range, we could actually be losing money.
Right.
But the way this is set up right now, I would project that we would lose money on, given the average ticket.
When you get assessed part of that penalty of the fixed cost.
That's right.
Yeah.
And that was where I was going.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It looked like we were going to lose money.
Right.
Yeah, I would like you to explore the court cost issue for us.
Okay.
Those are not losing money,
Right.
you know. I mean, I don't want to make a ton on these tickets,
No.
but I don't want to lose money.
It's not, yeah. Court is generally not a revenue maker.
No, it shouldn't.
But, yeah. I will ask more questions.
That's all I have.
Other question I had was, there's a May 1st start date on this. Any reason why we wouldn't start sooner since we have a joint police department?
We can, it's just, I put that date in there as a date holder, based on the fact that the councils need to approve it.
All right. That's not me. All right. Any other questions? Any guidance you want to give council
I like it.
on hold? All right. Is that all you need from us?
Yes.
All right. Mr. Town Manager?
And I am going to, some respect to our town attorney, we have 6 minutes left to discuss the changes in liquor law from the state legislature.
So this is a change that happened in 2024. Senate Bill 231 allows for discretion in holding public hearings on issuance of new licenses. This is part of a larger liquor bill, and this change was just a minor piece of that liquor bill that passed in the legislature. And so just wanted to let you know of this change of state law. It's not required, where it was previously required, that you hold a public hearing on new liquor license applications under state law. It's no longer required. So if you wanted to, you could decide that your town clerk could issue liquor licenses on an administrative basis rather than holding a public hearing and having town council make that decision.
What are your thoughts? Valerie?
I guess I would ask, was the hearing element an antiquated relic from prior days when people were super uptight about liquor license, or what was the original intent and purpose of a hearing? Because I would be scared to let something go if there's a purpose that we should be.
You sat through one liquor license hearing, and a lot of the questions and a lot of the criteria is antiquated. Does it meet the needs of the neighborhood? I do think that our liquor laws are very antiquated, and yes, that is a relic of that time.
So if there was one that was particularly polarizing, would we be able to identify it for review and hearing?
I think that the way that the ordinance change would Well, what I would recommend if you did want to move forward with this change is to allow the town clerk to administratively approve licenses and also allow the town clerk to refer an application to the council should she decide that a hearing is appropriate.
And that's where I was gonna go. One addition though is that I would like the town clerk to make us aware of all of them, even those that you approve.
So I think if we modeled the community development director's process where they notify us and then we have the ability to kind of pull things off the consent agenda, is there a way to mirror that process?
I mean, so part of this is, one thing that is a beneficial piece of allowing the town clerk the administrative authority is it helps speed the process along. If you have something go on consent and then you have to pull it up and decide whether you want to approve it, I mean, I would give your town clerk the discretion and the trust to decide what issues are controversial and need to be put forward to the town council. I mean, your town clerk isn't going to want to decide something on an administrative basis that's super controversial.
Right.
One thing that I would note, we do approve special events permits administratively right now. And like the new liquor license applications, you have to do a public notice where you post it in the paper and then on the actual location. And if we get any comments that are against it, that would be usually the type of thing that would trigger me bringing it to the town council. So if there's something of a particularly controversial nature, we would probably get those public comments and that would trigger it going before town council, just so you have kind of a reference point for what that might look like.
Any other questions or comments? Carol?
I'm a little hesitant about this. Doesn't seem like we're going to be overwhelmed with the number of new liquor licenses. Maybe we'll be surprised. But we have not given our community development officer the admin ability to handle land use things that come up to him. And if we are looking at a sign, it seems to me that this is more important than a change of sign on a retail operation. Bottom line is we established the town with a commitment to transparency and accountability. It's very hard for your average person to know what the town council is going to vote on, much less what the town clerk is administratively going to discuss. And it's very clear when no one shows up for the public meeting that we can move on. But this is an opportunity to hear from people who might identify something that hadn't occurred to any of us. Would we not have a leeway then to make a decision based on something that we weren't aware of?
I'm not sure if I understand that.
Well, for the land use applications, there's a very specific set of considerations that we go through.
Right.
But it does give us the latitude of making a decision. I think a new liquor license has more impact than some of the land use we've looked at. And I'm hesitant to change it. I don't think it's going to change workloads a whole lot.
See, as I've looked at it, and something I was waiting for time to bring up, is do we still need to be looking at all of those signs and having staff spend the staff time needed to write the staff summary sheet and everything versus handling that in the normal administrative process?
I think that's a valid question. Obviously, we're not going to answer that here today. But I think a public hearing is a reasonable tool that is not too time consuming for a fairly big impact decision.
So I I sat on the fence on this one, right? I had the same opinion as you, honestly, coming into this, and then as I heard more about it today and was listening and the process to it, and quite honestly, I do find that some of the liquor laws are antiquated. I kind of was swayed, right? I think that to spur the opportunity for businesses or a business to have a liquor license, and it could be restricted by the process, right? And the was quite a process, lots of questions, lots of, does it serve the neighborhood, antiquated questions. I kind of feel like I have to trust in the town staff to be able to call those that are polarizing to our opinion, or to us to view, and the ones that are more routine in nature, I would trust them with that process. But at first, I was definitely like, why would we get rid of this process?
Is there any other comments? Sure.
Just to get an idea of what would change, what's the timeline if the town clerk were to administratively review and make a decision versus if it went to council and a public hearing?
So the public noticing requirements would still remain the same, and I would still need to wait 30 days after receiving the application to make the decision itself. But I would be able to make the public notice, which the public notice for the two events would be the same, minus the fact that instead of saying, bring your comments before town council at this time, it would indicate where to submit the comments to, and that a public hearing could be held if there were objections received by the town clerk. But it would be essentially a 30-day period. But if it needs to be submitted to me and then a public hearing needs to happen, it's a 30-day period at least after the application is received. And then that can vary depending on what else town council is dealing with, and how many other things are on the agenda and when we can get it scheduled.
So could it double the time? Is that a...
It could potentially double the time in certain circumstances, depending on what else the council is looking at, but it really is going to vary on how many other things the council has to balance at any given time and how that lines up with the timing of the submission.
Any other questions? Then can I just get a thumbs up or thumbs down on whether we'd like the attorney and town clerk to bring us something that would make a change, or we want to leave it the same? Who would like them to bring us something for a change? Who is opposed? You got your task. All right, at that point, I believe Mr. Town Manager is after 7 o'clock, and I'll declare this meeting adjourned, and we will immediately start the town council meeting.